Well, this week we're going to talk about the President Hotel, also known as President Hotel Apartments. This week we found out that it was sold to a developer who's going to reopen it as a hotel. Linda, you broke the story in the city, and can you just tell us a little bit about what happened, who owned it, who's going to own it, and what's going to happen with the tenants?
Sure. So on Tuesday, a Chicago-based hotel developer called AJ Capital Partners closed escrow on the building, and they plan to convert the property back into a hotel that they're going to call the Graduate Palo Alto, and it's going to be 100 rooms, and they hope to open it by 2020. And according to Chris Dressel of Flynn Investments, who was the former owner, he said that, I think he had actually owned it for about 20 years, that the building wasn't on the market, but the hotel group approached him with a deal that he couldn't pass up, so he sold the building, and this is sort of what this company does. Their Graduate Hotels division, which is their boutique hotels collection, they go out to various cities looking for historic properties, and they target university towns, and so they already have opened 12 hotels, and they have about another 5 that they're developing right now.
Looks like they have some in the Bay Area already, or some in the works.
In Berkeley, they had one in Berkeley, yeah.
Yeah. So this story is not just about how a former hotel, which was opened in 1929, designed by Burge Clark, Palo Alto architect. It's not just the story of that Renaissance, but it's also the story of people who will be evicted out of there. There's some 58 units that are currently rented out of the 75, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, and you met with some of those folks.
I did. I went over there this week and met with them. So the building really still has a lot of its charm. So when you walk in, you just kind of get this unique vibe when you walk in. It still has the wood beams. It still has a lot of the wrought iron, the tile floors, the tiles around the windows, and even the elevator has one of the those metal grills that you have to open So
does it have a doorman with like a little cap?
I'm expecting to see a doorman, but they don't have the doorman. So it's not run down in any way. I mean, it still has a lot of the charm and character from when it was built, with like the murals painted onto the walls.
Wow.
And so it feels almost like going into like an old European building. So I met with the residents there, and a lot of the residents have been there for like over 30 years. Like I think the longest person has been there for 37 years. And most of the people living there are either Stanford professors or they're entrepreneurs. There's an architect. There's a woman who launched a language school in Palo Alto. So it's a wide mix of people. And I'm told that there were restaurant owners and Palo Alto chefs and a co-founder of a Palo Alto-based brewery that once lived there. So it's a wide mix of tenants that live there. And most of them work in Palo Alto as well. And in talking to them, most of them said that they went there just plan on staying for about a year. And then the longer they stayed there, they just end up thinking, well, I'm just going to stay here because the building grew on them.
Yeah.
And so there's one woman who moved in 30 years ago. She was a student at Stanford, and she just decided that she loved the building. And the building is old and has some oddities, but that's kind of what brought the residents together. So there's this really tight-knit, unique community within the building. And so not all of the rooms have full kitchens. So a lot of people have hot plates and they'll have microwaves, because they are still as they were as a hotel with like the refrigerator. And so some of the residents that have smaller units, when they entertain, they'll ask their neighbors if they can borrow their kitchens, and so they'll prepare their food in their kitchens. And then they said it's the kind of place where you open the door, you'll find like a soup and other goodies outside your front door because everyone kind of looks out for each other. And quite often they have these communal dinners up on the rooftop. So it's just that sort of a vibe. And then a lot of them actually rent extra space, which they will use as their offices. They might
the same building?
live on one floor, yeah. And there was actually a couple who lived there, and even after they divorced, the husband moved down 2 stories, and they still live in the same building because they just love the building.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the building is full of all these historic charms, and of course it is a 1929 Birch Clark.
Yeah.
And I know this AJ firm has talked about making all sorts of improvements, renovations, which is always tricky with historical buildings. Do you have any sense of what's going to be done with the Hotel President once it's built? Have they said anything today about what sort of?
Yeah, they said basically every room will be touched with some sort of renovation. So I think the exterior will remain as is, but they've talked about updating elevators, which I'm not sure if that means adding elevators or replacing the one that's there. But every room they plan on renovating. So
it's just going to be kind of not very visible renovations to pedestrians, but
Correct.
Inside is going to be refurbished. And Jocelyn kind of mentioned the kind of central question right now, what's going to happen to the tenants, and AJ has some say in that because I understand that they're going to offer some relocation assistance. So what have they said about how they're going to assist the people who are going to be displaced?
Yeah, and that's one thing that Chris Dressel said, that when they approached him, they said that they were sensitive that there were tenants there and that they had planned to put some sort of package together. So right now, they're offering a $3,000 relocation assistance. And they are meeting with residents. I think they had their first round of meetings yesterday afternoon, and they're meeting again next week to meet with people that might have special needs. But in speaking to one of the tenants who's the piano teacher, she has a baby grand in her studio, and then she also has an upright because she gives piano lessons from her home. And she said it would cost more than that just to move her 2 pianos. So the residents, they didn't know a lot at the time when I spoke to them. They were, waiting to talk to the developers to see exactly what they had planned. But just this initial $3,000 for a lot of them, they said that's not going to be enough. Others who were just the short timers there, they might be happy with the $3,000.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why this story is particularly interesting is because, of course, the region has a housing crisis. Although this was not considered low-income housing, it's not run or overseen by Palo Alto Housing, the nonprofit that manages the affordable housing program for Palo Alto. The rents, according to the sign that you saw, and then also according to the tenants, was kind of in between market rate and
but they range. The units are only 250 to 800 square feet. So they're small, and they don't have kitchens, but they are their own self-contained units, which residents said they're happy with that. And so the prices range between $1,200 and $2,400. And so I spoke to one woman in a studio without a kitchen, and she pays about $1,900 a month. And I think it was around 25.
Yeah,
it was around $2,500 is the median.
Yeah,
rent in Palo Alto.
For a one-bedroom, and then by comparison, Palo Alto Housing, for their Oak Court apartments, a one-bedroom is $1,400. So between $1,400 and market rate $2,500 is kind of where this.
So it's not like, it's lower than where you can find maybe in some other places, but it's not considered affordable.
So some people have raised the question of why the eviction of scores of people, 58 or more, is not analogous to the Buena Vista Mobile Home Park situation, because there the city and the county took huge steps to preserve that community. So obviously there's a legal ordinance that addressed that. I was wondering, Gennady, if you might take a crack at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Buena Vista, everyone recognizes a very unique situation because it was the one and only mobile home park in the city. 400 people roughly would have been displaced if that had been converted to what the plans were at the time. And so it was also considered a hugely important affordable housing area, probably the prime one in Palo Alto. So if it was gone, there would be a huge amenity loss. And so you could justify kind of using public funds to preserve affordable housing in the case of Buena Vista in a way that you really can't justify, or at least it would be a lot harder to use public funds to buy basically a private apartment building / hotel.
Yeah.
So I think, this is not to say that, the tribulations of the residents who would be displaced are not severe, but it just goes to show that Buena Vista was kind of in its own category, which is why the county stepped in and the legislator stepped in. it's kind of hard to imagine that happening with any like market rate development, even one that kind of provides this very important income range that you guys were just talking about.
Yeah. Some people have like thrown out the idea of the Ellis Act, and I just wanted to touch on that. The Ellis Act, for say this right, is applied when apartment buildings are completely turned over into something else, like commonly apartments into condos. So there's certain regulations with that. Actually, the relocation assistance is much higher, but those apply to rent-stabilized, rent-controlled buildings, which President Hotel Apartments is not. So this apparently doesn't apply.
I don't think it applies
And,
there.
and also on a related note, Buena Vista Mobile Home Park was kind of governed by its own ordinance that pertains to mobile home parks. Palo Alto's and Californian ordinance. So in that case, there was a lot of like relocation assistance that was kind of mandated, and then there was a lot of negotiations that raised it further. So I do feel like Buena Vista residents, in some ways, had more legal protections because of the zoning code and the city's ordinances.
Yeah.
And also the fact that it would to turn it into something else would require a zoning change that I don't think the city council would have an appetite for, because after losing such a resource. Whereas in the case of Hotel President, it's going to back being what it was, a hotel, and it's kind of hard to argue that the hotel is incompatible with its original use what it was. So even on the zoning front, on the legal front, on the financial front, on the public policy front, it's just very different situations. And so I think it's a tough comparison to make.
Yeah. There have been some other hotels that have met various fates over time in downtown Palo Alto. I just wanted to mention a couple of those. So a couple of high-end hotels that we now know as Epiphany Hotel on Hamilton and Hotel Keene on High Street used to be, in the case of the Epiphany, that was Casa Olga, which was a healthcare facility, and Hotel Keene was the SRO Palo Alto Hotel, and those are definitely on the high-end scale. One hotel became an office building, the Craig Hotel on Hamilton, and that was interesting because some people actually tried to step in and save it as low-income housing, including Jim Bear and another group, I'm not sure who that was, but they didn't pull something together in time, so that became an office building. And then interestingly, some hotels actually became low-income housing. So the Barker Hotel, which was, where was that? Downtown also, was taken over by Palo Alto Housing back in '95 and has 26 rooms. And then just recently, in our neighborhood, the Hotel California. Yeah, that was bought not by Palo Alto Housing, but by a charity, and it's being managed by Palo Alto Housing, and that has 20 units for people earning 30 to 60% of AMI.
Sign of the times. It's a very, very hot hotel market in Palo Alto, and it's kind of another reason why I think the city would be loath to step into this, or at least go beyond just urging AJ to give good relocation assistance. I mean, the fact of the matter is, hotels are really good for the city's bottom line. It's and you could see it in the current discussion about raising the hotel tax. That's which is probably going to be on the November ballot.
Yeah, it's not yet on the ballot, but getting there.
It sounds like they're going to put it on the ballot later this month. And so, just some few really quick numbers. In 2015, fiscal year 2015, the city received about $16.7 million from hotel taxes, TOTs, $16.7 million. In 2017, it was $23.5 million.
Wow.
So it's quite a jump, and it's expected to be $24.4 million in this year that's just ending right now. So it's been going up steadily, and the council has been talking about how badly it needs revenues for infrastructure. There's a direct link to that. So it's like, it is bad news on the housing front, because it's a setback for the city as it's trying to build new housing to just quickly lose 75 units like this weeks after you approve 57. But from the fiscal standpoint, the hotels are a boon for the city.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the city's efforts to protect renters? Because there was a colleague's memo last fall that went nowhere at the city council level.
Yes, absolutely. I think the colleagues' memo from Tom Du Bois and Karen Holman and Lydia Koo kind of address this idea that the market is moving really fast, and as Tom said, Adam Smith's invisible hand is pushing a lot of people out, which I think is what we're seeing with the Hotel President. And so Last fall, they proposed a memo which would institute rental protections, or as opponents would say, rent control. I don't think they kind of went that far. But it would kind of create a few rules, basically keep landlords from raising rents by like more than 5% per year, or at least explore that kind of stuff. Giving renters more protection from no-cause evictions. Basically recognizing the fact that 44% of the city is renters, and we don't really hear from them as much in the meetings and in the public sphere as we do from others. So that was one attempt to kind of handle that, which I don't think would have done much for this particular proposal, but it might help more in circumstances where you have massive rent hikes, which we've also seen a lot of in Palo Alto. So they proposed this basically, and then last fall that proposal was rejected by a 3-6 vote. The rest of their colleagues thought this comes too close to rent control, that it's actually going to it's going to do more damage to the housing market than assist it. So I do think that the hotel president's conversion may continue to spur this conversation in the coming months. Maybe the city council will return to this topic. Certainly Tom hasn't given up, he's been mentioning it. And with the election coming up, it'll be interesting to see what the candidates say in the next few months about this idea of assisting renters.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I thought was interesting about that discussion was that both sides were taking the same fact, which is if you have rent stabilization, then tenants wouldn't leave. And some people said that was a good thing, and some people said that was a really terrible thing. So it's just completely a philosophical difference there that they're looking at. One of the conversations got a little bit touchy, with one side accusing the other side of not being sincere, I believe. So it was pretty factious. It was between Wolbach and Holman, retorting that, how dare you question our sincerity of bringing this type of housing, protection forward.
Yeah, because I think like the people who oppose it would kind of the people who oppose rent stabilization tend to be more supply side kind of, we need to build more housing kind of thing, and they may see this as a distraction from distraction from that effort. Like, instead of spending so much staff time on trying to figure out how to like keep rents from rising, we should be investing this time in actually building more housing. And so, the three council members who signed off on this tend to be kind of more cautious about approving development anyway. So it did become a little political once it got to the full council. But I think it's an evolving story. I think we're going to see some more kind of proposals of this sort.
Yeah, and the city just approved the first housing development this year, over on the corner there, Page Mill and El Camino.
Yeah, we were calling it micro units all this time, but I just learned during this webcast that the hotel president had 250 square foot studios.
Those are truly micro units.
Those are truly micro units, and I don't think anyone's mentioned it before. It's kind of blowing my mind.
Yeah, so there's a set aside in that building, right, for 120 to 150 percent of median income, but that's only a part of it. The rest is going to be market rate.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the things that's interesting is we have these situations where we're looking at a whole lot of units or apartments that are going to be turned over quickly, but then there's also the sort of over time erosion where certain like low income, not low income, but more quote unquote affordable housing, apartment buildings downtown are being scrapped, and then new luxury high-end buildings are coming in. There's one I was just looking at. Okay, this was the AAA building. So that was office. Yeah, that was office, so it wasn't housing replaced by other housing. There are other situations of that. But the housing that's going in, there's a penthouse there that's renting for $38,000 a month.
Wow.
And then the next lowest is $17,000. I think it's between $7,000 and $17,000 a month. So this is the kind of direction that people are complaining about, are concerned about, writing letters, speaking to the council about, just the idea of, is Palo Alto, only going to be a town for the wealthy, and what's going to happen to our teachers and our baristas and all of our low-income workers. So and I think that's one thing that some of the tenants were asking themselves. What's going to happen? Can we stay here?
Yeah, I think they were saying for the amount of people that are being displaced, are there that many affordable units even in Palo Alto where they can be relocated to?
No, there's huge waiting lists for
but I don't even know if they would all qualify for true affordable housing. They just happen to live where the rent wasn't quite as high. So that's another question. Would they even be eligible for affordable housing?
Yeah. Bringing up the question, what is affordable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one person called herself middle class.
Yeah, they consider themselves middle-class
Yeah.
workers.
Although we've learned the last few months that that's a
Yeah.
very fungible term.
It is,
Yeah, the missing
yeah.
middle, indeed.
I do think I should just point out. I think the city council is taking some steps to kind of address the kind of the market fluctuations, like the AAA development. I mean, I think we're just looking at the last couple of zoning kind of proposals they looked at.
Yeah.
There's still that affordable housing zoning that's kind of going through the pipeline.
true.
There's the workforce housing. Quote unquote, that's what it's called, that they approved. I know it's a controversial term,
Yeah.
for the Windy Hill development. And I think both of those are trying to kind of address this very situation that you just mentioned, the big penthouse taking over. Kind of relax.
That's an outlier, but still the rest of the building kind of reflected the same trend.
But I think it's reflective of the council's philosophy, trying to change zoning to allow smaller units, more units, kind of relax parking standards where you could, close to transit, things like that.
But that's what the residents here were saying. They felt like this building in particular had all of those qualities where it was car light, it's right downtown, it was small units, it was affordable, and yet there was no protections put in place to keep it as housing.
That is a good argument. So I know that they're working with some attorneys. Are they going to explore?
They're going
Their
to
rights.
explore their legal options. I mean, some people I spoke to said they understand that things change, but they felt like they were kept in the dark because the developers had been talking to the city before they made an official announcement, and they just felt like they should have been notified sooner, and they feel like maybe the city was meeting in secret. There's something that's not on the up and up, so that they're meeting with an attorney just to see what some of their options are.
Sure, yeah. And then moving forward in terms of the city's process, if this goes forward, then the developer will need to get some historical review, I believe.
Yeah, I think, well, the hotel is allowed by right in this area, so there won't need to be a zoning change. There will be hearings in front of the Architecture Review Board and the Historic Resources Board, just to kind of work out the designs. And I think Jim Keane indicated that that's going to be this fall, maybe sometime later this year. So I think by Palo Alto standards, as far as they go, it should be pretty, well, I don't want to say it, but
Pretty straightforward.
the hotel use is allowed by right. I think that is going to help the
Yeah.
project go along
Yeah.
pretty smoothly.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, thanks for this discussion. We'll see what shapes up for the President Hotel. Okay. That wraps it up for this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. If you want to follow this story and other stories in Palo Alto, go to paloaltoonline.com. If you want to comment on this story, there are a couple of good discussions happening on Town Square. That's paloaltoonline.com/square. Please subscribe or like this video below. And you can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we'll see you next week.